they saw what happened with us. And so all of a sudden, you know, they started showing up. They all had singers with long blonde hair.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that.
My name is Michael Anthony, currently touring with Sammy Hagar in our Best of All Worlds band, formerly of Van Halen, Chickenfoot, The Circle, and some other names that you probably don't care to know. My sister, who's a couple years older than me, she grew up, she was like right in that hippie era in the late 60s. And so she would bring home records all the time, which my parents did not like MC5, Cream, The Who, you know, obviously Led Zeppelin, and Humble Pie. You know, I think that the 70s, 60s going into the 70s, you know, it's just a great time for rock music, you know, great bands. But she brought home, I remember her bringing home the second Blue Cheer record, and it was called Outside Inside. And one thing, you could open that record up, it opened up one way, and then you open up another way, and there was a picture of the band playing like in some theater or whatever, and their bass player Dickie Peterson had a jazz bass, Fender jazz bass, slung down around his knees with a stack of Marshalls behind him, and I said, that's what I want to do. Yeah. What happened was, the first band that I was playing in, we had like a little three-piece band, and the guitar player, he had a Fender Mustang, and I took the two top strings off of it, and that was the first time, and I started playing it like a bass, and I never knew how to tune a bass or, you know, the correct tuning, and so he took the two, you know, the E and the B strings off, and then I just took the E, A, D, G strings, and he played an E chord, and I tuned those strings to the first four notes of an E chord. And for the first year and a half that I played, that's how I played with that tuning. Yeah, my dad used to go, I used to go out with him all the time. We'd go to, every Sunday they'd have like a swap meet, flea market type thing at the drive-in theater. And he'd take me, and I remember I'd always go by, there was a guy who was selling, you know, they were just like little Japanese instruments, but he'd have all the guitars and basses lined up and little amps, and I'd be walking by every Sunday going, oh man, check that out. And so for $50, my dad bought me, is called a Victoria bass, and it was a little, I think it was a Gibson amp that had like two 6-inch speakers in it. And what's really cool is, after I played the bass for a while, I got rid of it and, you know, kind of moved on and got my first Fender bass. But years later, I was able to locate who had that original bass, and I've got it.
Wow.
I got it back. But the amp, I blew the speakers up within the first couple of days I had it. And so then I had to start working to buy a bigger amp. I was lead singing in a band, three-piece band. The other two guys lived in Azusa, California. We were called Snake, and we were doing, you know, the hard rock thing. And we happened to get on a show that was at the Pasadena City College in an auditorium there, and Van Halen was playing. They had just recently changed their name to Van Halen. Roth had recently joined the band, and they changed it from Mammoth to Van Halen. And we got there, and we used to have it was called a Voice of the Theater PA, really cool PA that I used to borrow from one of my drama teachers from school. He would let us use it. And the Van Halen brothers, Roth had his little PA, and I guess they blew it up, and they asked me if they could use our PA, and I said, yeah, sure. And that's kind of like how I kind of struck up a little relationship with the brothers and with Dave. At that point, we were all going to Pasadena City College. I'd be going to like a jazz improv class, and I'd see Alex coming from his same class, and, you know, we'd see each other. And I knew of them because I saw them. I actually saw Eddie, Alex, and the bass player's name was Mark Stone. I saw them play once when I was going to Arcadia High School, because we had a fair on the football field they would have every year, And they played one time, and it was those three, and Eddie was doing all the lead singing. And they were playing. I remember I was really impressed. They were doing like Cream and the Who, and Eddie was like just playing it like almost note for note. I'm like, wow, But so we all knew of each other, but it was actually through a mutual friend that I was good friends with in high school. That was good friends with Eddie, who he met in college at a music theory class, who suggested to him when they were getting rid of their bass player, he goes, hey, I know a guy who might be interested in joining the band. And so he gave Eddie and Alex my number. It wasn't instantly. In fact, Dave wasn't even there. It was just Eddie and Alex. And it was funny because they rehearsed in a little tiny garage. A friend of theirs, this girl, in Pasadena, and they had to play so quiet. Ed had, he had some little amp, I don't even know what kind it was, but he would bring, literally, he didn't even have a speaker cabinet. He would bring a speaker and set it down and play the amp through the speaker because they had to be really quiet. Alex had t-shirts over all the cymbals. Everything was muted or whatever. Because after that, then he would start to bring a cabinet. Then we had to start finding different places to rehearse because obviously we couldn't do it in the neighborhood. It would, everybody be calling the police on us all the time. We always worked on building a following through playing and not through like trying to do any kind of publicity. That's basically the only kind of publicity back then was you go out and you play. And we had a map, Dave had one, and we would just mark out different places. We'd play as far as the gas money would take us. We used to play, in the early days, to spread the word, we just played as everywhere that we could. At Pasadena City College, they had a quad area. And they would have bands play there in the app. Why are you calling me? Oh, that's the other knuckle. Okay, let me silence my phone. Okay, you can keep all that in. Okay, so we would play this in the afternoon at Pasadena City College quite a bit, and then there were the backyard parties, and we played some of the largest backyard parties that they had in Pasadena. I mean, I remember playing a couple times. They had like 1,200 people, and some kid's yard, his parents were gone for the weekend. So hey, we'd either get paid in beer or whatever, and or we'd get a little bit of money. They'd charge like $1 at the door or whatever, and that would pay for the beer and to make a little money. And then when things got out of hand, the guy who was having the party would call the police on his own party, and boom, that was it. That'd be it. Some of those were original, but most of them were cover songs. Because those were the only gigs we could get back then. People didn't want to hire us to play original music at like a Gazzari's, or a lot of these clubs would audition in Pasadena, Pomona, everywhere we could. They all wanted to hear like, Led Zeppelin, and I mean, we used to even play Kool and the Gang songs at Gazzari's.
That I'd like to hear.
Well, hey, we did them good, yeah, and the horn parts we would actually sing or improvise on it. We'd make it our Van Halen.
Yeah.
And then eventually, like when we were playing Gazzari's, I keep coming back to that because that was the place that we played the longest, trying to break out, out on our own. And we would, after a while, we'd play like the first set would play a bunch of cover songs, whatever, and then we'd start sneaking a few of our songs in there. And after a while, people were really digging our stuff, so we could add some of that in with the cover stuff. I remember one place that we auditioned for, I can't remember the name of it, in Pasadena, which was a really popular little club. It was like one of the only couple of places where you could play rock music. And they didn't hire us because we were too loud. So we didn't get that gig. So a lot of them ended up like that. So then we just pack up and look for another place where we could play or try to audition. There were a lot of auditions that, that was the only time we ever, your hair's too long, you're too loud, the music's too heavy, whatever, you're not enough Kool in the Gang, We had a big following in Pasadena, but when I joined Van Halen, actually, they had just started playing a place called Gazzari's on the Strip. They had just auditioned, and I think they had played maybe a couple of shows there. And so when I joined the band, I was literally learning, because they had a repertoire of over 300 songs. I was learning like 4 or 5 songs like every couple of days. You know, I was just cramming it in because they had a show coming up there. And so that's kind of like what bridged the gap, because before that we were playing to just, you know, kids wearing jeans and t-shirts and whatever. And then all of a sudden, my first time, and I never really hung out in Hollywood. I cruised there with a couple of buddies of mine, a couple of times, just cruising the Sunset Strip and going, oh my God, look at the glitter, look at the platform shoes, all that stuff. And the next thing I know, we're out there, and, you know, everybody's walking around looking like David Bowie at the time, you know. This was right around 75. 74, 75, 76.
Yep.
And that was the, you know, it was a big glam scene in Hollywood at the time.
Yep.
And I mean, you'd go there on the weekends, and the Sunset Boulevard would be packed just between Gazzari's, and they had another place on Santa Monica and La Cienega called Starwood Club. We played Gazzari's first. I got to just tell you this really quick. And we were almost like the house band. We would do a dance contest. We play 5 sets a night for, you know, over the weekend, 3 nights, 4 nights. And then we got our first gig where we could actually play original material at the Whiskey. And Bill Gazzari of Gazzari's did not like that. It was like kind of a conflict thing. And so we kind of got fired from Gazzari's, but it was like the next logical step that we needed to take to be able to play our own stuff. We were playing in Hollywood, and like I said, all of a sudden we had a big following coming to see us. And we used to play the Pasadena Civic Auditorium, and we could draw like 2,000, 2,500, close to almost 3,000 people there. And so a lot of people were kind of taking interest. Who's this band? You know, we'd be out there flyering Aerosmith concerts at Anaheim Stadium and different places to get the crowd to see us. And so all of a sudden you hear, oh, hey, so-and-so might be here. And so there'd be a reserve sign sitting on the table over at the Whiskey, which sat there the whole night, you know, with nobody there. And so after doing that a zillion times, all of a sudden we were playing a place called the Starwood Club that I mentioned. And Paul Stanley from Kiss comes walking in. And it's kind of like, you know, what do you say? We're like, oh my God. Well, we didn't even really know he was there. So what he does is he goes back to the band, Gene Simmons, and there was a band, I can't remember if they were called The Boys or something like that, the band that was opening up for us, Paul Stanley liked. And he told Gene, he said, you got to come down and see this band. They're great. And so Gene comes to the club to see us, and that's where we, incidentally, where we met him. But he didn't like the band that was opening up for us. He goes, no, these are the guys right here. And so after the show, he comes up into our dressing room, and, you know, the jaws clank on the floor. Yeah. And we had been talking to some guy who was actually like a food, ran a food liquidation company or whatever, who wanted to manage us. And she's like, going, oh no, man, you know. And we had a meeting with Gene, who was staying out in Hollywood at the time. She actually wanted to manage the band. So we did a demo tape. I can't remember. Between a couple of studios in LA, and then he had to go back to New York because they were preparing to do a big Japanese tour. So he said, hey, why don't you guys, I'll fly you out to New York. And basically my stuff, the bass stuff was done, the drums were done. There were a couple, I think a couple little guitar things that we wanted to do, and Roth's vocals. So Gene flew us all to New York and put us up in a hotel. And it was like, you know, that was my first time out of Southern California. All of us, actually. And so while, and we recorded at Electric Lady Studios, so we were all like just going, oh my God, Hendrix's studio. And I remember every morning, because Alex and I wouldn't have to work a lot of that time, we'd go downstairs, and the first thing we would do in the morning was get a hot dog on the street. And I was like, oh man, this is living, we've made it, you know? When we used to rehearse in this little garage when I first joined the band, and we used to rehearse there every day, for a while, and that's when Eddie was also developing his hammers, his tapping style that he, you know, and it's funny because there were like 2 or 3 guitar players in the area that Ed was friends with, and we, you know, and they knew that we rehearsed there. And I remember one time we went to take a break and we walk outside, and there were a couple of guys there like this, listening at the door, and they wanted to hear what Ed played. There were gigs that we would play. We played a place called the Golden West Ballroom in Norwalk, California. And when we would play, that was one place where we could play original stuff. And we opened up for UFO there. I think that was one of the biggest shows we ever did. I had a few bands that would come through there and play this place. It held about 1,500 to 2,000 people. But when Ed would play a solo, Dave would tell him, he'd say, turn your back to the audience, dude, because you got to go, you know, you got this thing and you don't want everybody to see it. So Eddie would literally, he'd play solos and he would turn his back to the audience when he would be tapping.
Wow.
Yeah, which was really, really interesting. You know, and it wasn't so much the tapping, but the way he did it, you know, was different than anybody else was trying to do. Quiet Riot, they opened up a show for us in Pasadena at an auditorium there by the college also, because we were at kind of at the same time. And what's really interesting was Randy was a very gifted guitar player that we all know, and he was kind of like on the kind of level that Ed was doing his stuff too. So there were 2 of these guys, you know, around that were like the masters, and all these other guitar players all floating around the area in bands. They were all like just, you know, trying to, how does he do that, you know? And Randy was the only other one besides Ed that, you know, you could see him. He was like, you know, he was doing the same type of thing, you know. Now Ed, even when we would rehearse, I'd go over to Eddie and Alex's house in Pasadena. They had a little tiny garage out in the back behind their house, and Ed would always, I'd go walking in there and I'd see the soldering iron frickin' smoking, and you know, that was just one thing about him. You know, there was a sound, or it wasn't anything to do with looks, but he was always looking for a different sound or whatever. And I mean, I'd never seen a guy take, like, I remember one time he had a beautiful Gibson ES 335 and frickin' butchered it because he didn't like the way it sounded. So I'll move this pickup here and do that there or whatever. And you know, at one point when he had the Strat, which would become the Franken Strat, his first one that he had was black and white. I remember when he did that, he just taped it up and painted it. He just wanted to do something crazy that, you know, didn't look like anybody else's guitar. And somewhere along the way he figured out that you just wire his pickup straight to the one frickin' volume knob, and you have a tone knob. He goes, that's all I need. I don't need the selector switch or any of that stuff. And he was just chasing the sound that he heard in his head he wanted to get. Dave was a great entertainer, you know. But when I first joined Van Halen, I didn't even plan on singing, because I'd been lead singing in every little garage band that I was in. I'm going, oh my God, I can just play bass. Dave sings. Ed harmonizes with him, and Alex would even yodel a little bit, but he wasn't really a singer. And then the first time they hear me sing background, then all of a sudden, boom, I'm singing all the backgrounds, you know. But yeah, and the one thing that we did really pay attention to was we knew that we had, you know, decent background vocals between Ed and myself, you know, backing up Dave. And so we would write with the intention of, you know, putting a lot of backgrounds in it, and not just be like a Led Zeppelin where there was just the solo guy singing. So we tried to, you know, that's one thing that we made a conscious effort, was to put a lot of background vocals because we thought it sounded cool. Pretty Woman.
Yeah. There was some nutty stuff. What were you dressed up as?
I was a samurai warrior.
Here's the lucky one.
Yeah.
Alex got the loincloth.
Yeah, Alex got the loin. What's interesting about making videos in the early days, we never could consider ourselves actors. Dave, he loved doing it. Eddie, Alex, and myself were like, hey, we play music. I'm not a freaking actor, but everybody wanted to have, there had to be some kind of storyline. It's like, I mean, the videos that Eddie, Alex, and myself liked the best were the ones that were either live or we were just playing with whatever else going on around us. You know, me running, you know, Alex Van Halen running around in a loincloth. And we actually filmed that whole Pretty Woman video up in Northern California in Valencia, right by Magic Mountain. Okay. And if you see that Pretty Woman video and you see Alex running and he does this like Tarzan yell, you look around, those are corn stalks in a little cornfield that we found. Wow. I mean, it was just crazy. You know, when it hit the 80s, we were not a band. You know, all of a sudden, everybody had blonde hair. Everybody's doing the frontman type of thing, and everybody had big hair and the makeup and whatever. And even though, you know, we had like longer whatever, we wore no makeup. You know, because we weren't that. We came from the '70s band era. You know, we got very popular in the '80s, but we were very influenced by all the bands of the '70s. Yeah. So I did not care to put eyeliner on, you know, when I go out there to play, or even, I hated when they even patted me down with pancake makeup when we shot a video. It's like, hey, no, you know. There's actually 3 Jack Daniels basses that are in existence that we had built. The original one is on display at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. The second one is almost unplayable because that was the one that mainly got the work out. The first one was built, you know, everyone, okay, I'll take it back. I drank a little bit of Jack Daniels in the early days, and after everybody going, yeah, guy, you ought to make a bass that looks like a Jack Daniels bottle, you drink some of my tech, Kevin Dugan, affectionately known as Doogie, and I got to get this right because he's sitting right here on the side watching me, and I'm sure he'll correct you guys if I'm wrong. You know, he kind of spearheaded this whole thing, and with the people that we were with, we actually used parts from an early Kramer bass. I forget what model it was. It had the tuners in the rear because, you know, you had to do that. And we kind of bastardized one of those basses and put the Jack Daniels bass together, and that's how it all kind of came to be. And it was more of a novelty act than anything that sounded or played good, because it played pretty poorly. I played live with it quite a bit, but then when we finally had the money and had the right people to build it for us, we had this other guy who built our second bass. I'm going off camera here.
James Tyler.
His name was James Tyler. We actually built it kind of properly. You know, it got decent pickups and everything, and got nicer graphics on it. And it, you know, it just kind of progressed. But that, you know, that's how it all came about. Because of my bad drinking habit back then.
Yeah, I'm sure that slowed down a bit, right?
Yeah, you know, Sammy and I, we when he left the band, you know, obviously I was part of Van Halen, so I stayed with Eddie, Alex, you know, because that was the band to me, you know, playing wise. But then when Sammy and I reconnected, we reconnected more even just on a human level, on a friendship level, than a musical level. And that's how we were introduced to each other when he first joined the band. Yeah, Sammy and I, we go way beyond the musical connection now. You know, we're practically neighbors in Southern California down at the beach, and so we see each other quite a bit. And it's not always about the music, you know. With Sam, it's usually about the tequila after that. No, but you know, we like cars, we like hanging out at the beach, and we like doing all those other things too. Rather, you know, we don't have to get together and just talk about, hey, well, you know, what song are we all going to write? And what, you know, it's like we all go, hey, let's go out and have a couple tacos and hit the beach or go for a drive or something like that. You know, and that's what, you know, that's what really makes the friendship work. You know, and so we kind of been on a long journey since then, since we reconnected. And, you know, we both love playing music. We both love having fun. We don't like all the drama that goes with it, you know, because at the end of Van Halen, I don't talk any dirt, but there was a lot of, you know, you know, just it was just bad. You know, just grew to be something that was not fun anymore. You know. And
let's go there for a second.
Okay.
You open the door.
Okay, but I'm gonna close it too. You can give me a couple shots, boy, and I'll go there. Yeah, see?
We'll get
Yeah. You know, but just like you know, everybody says it like just like a marriage or anything else. But you know, things change, people change, and sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Sometimes you know, everyone's very amicable, and it goes like that. And I thank God, you know, I've seen all these things behind the music with this band and that band and all the dirt and whatever, and all I ever thought was, God, I sure hope they don't do one on Van Halen, because boy, it would be a kicker, let me tell you. Well, just like the Jack Daniels bass, the same thing, the way the hot sauce came about, because I love hot, spicy food. And after fans started to catch wind of it, we'd be playing somewhere, like in Philadelphia or wherever, and all of a sudden, I get a couple bottles of hot sauce from a fan or whatever. Next thing, people are sending hot sauce to me. They're going, hey, people drop this off to you, Chili's, whatever. And from then, you know, people are going, hey, you should make a hot sauce, man. That's all you freaking do, and you know. And so I thought, yeah, maybe I'll try it out. And coincidentally, at the same time, Joe Perry from Aerosmith had come out with a hot sauce just recently called Boneyard Brew. And I go, oh, yeah, I'll check it out. So I called the company that Joe Perry was doing his sauce with. And they go, yeah, give us like 300 grand and we'll develop something. We'll slap your name on it and we'll put it out, you know. And I go, no, that isn't what I'm all about. If I'm going to do a hot sauce, I want the flavor to be how I want it to be. And so I do a music merchandising show every year. I would do called the NAMM convention out in Anaheim, and there was this hot sauce is called Ring of Fire. We actually filmed a video called "Don't Tell Me What Love Could Do" with Sam, and I love this was their logo, and I go, wow, I really dig that logo, and I love the sauce, and I go, can I take that sauce? And they gave me the bottle, and I go, oh, I'm going to get a tattoo of that. And I did, and somebody who knows the owner of this company saw me at an autograph signing at this NAMM convention that I do. And he goes, hey, I know the owner. Next thing you know, I get hats and T-shirts for this guy's company. And then we get to talk, and he goes, hey, I'll develop a sauce with you. And you can be, you know, I'll give you a basic red sauce, and we'll go from there and whatever. And so I was basically on the ground level to develop this. This was like right around 2004 when we started it, and that's how my sauce came to be. You know? It's called Mad Anthony's. What else would it be called? The only regret that I have is how things unfortunately turned out for Van Halen. You know, I'm not saying, you know, it's a culmination of everything that happened or whatever, because when Van Halen was really firing on all 12 cylinders, you know, we're living the dream, it's the fairy tale or whatever. And the first time it ended when Roth left the band. Luckily, Sammy joined the band, and it was like a rebirth. And obviously the band was even bigger at that point or whatever. But the only regret I have is that the way it all ended. It should have gone out with a freaking bang that shook the world, and it was more like a whimper the way everything ended, you know. Now, unfortunately, Eddie and I we had some issues, and I'm sure that if he had not passed when he did, that we would have reconciled, or we would have really you know, calmed all that stuff down, because I did hear, and I've talked to Wolfgang about it, that, you know, they were planning on coming to all of us and putting together a big reunion tour with all of us. And, you know, at that point in Ed's life, I think he was, you know, he was a little bit more like, hey, you know, the past is the past. Let's all freaking, you know, water under the bridge, that whole bit. But unfortunately, it was not to be.